CREA, Scott.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well, my friend.
Good to see you guys.
Yes.
Happy New Year.
And a beautiful sunny day we have here.
It is fantastic. How were your holidays?
Wonderful. Lots of family time. Busy, but really good.
Yeah.
And yours?
Yeah, I'm starting my diet as of today. That's it. No more food. We're done. I'm drinking water. Here's the water.
I got that.
No more wine, grappa, you know, that type. No, we're done. We're done.
Right. Yes.
That's it.
I know that feeling.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's good to see everybody. Yeah.
Got a bunch joining in here, which is great. We'll give it a few more minutes while people are signing in, and we'll go through this.
Good afternoon, Scott.
Hello, Gautam. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Yeah, Happy New Year to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shall we still got some coming in?
Yep.
Okay, give it a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Amazing when you have a topic like this. How many more people? Come on.
You think it's a topic, Scott, or just your personality?
I think it's the personality. I think it's the person. Thanks for that, Elroy. I appreciate that.
No problem. I just had to clarify.
We'll see how many come on in May. All right. Probably close to getting started, Michelle, by the looks of it. And all right. So first of all, Happy New Year to everybody. 2024 is here. And I can tell you my sense is it's going to be, if you're working, it's going to be a very good year. Okay. There's lots of positive stuff in the news, just talking about activity wise, interest rates being, people looking at, adjusting those down. Mortgage companies are already, talking about, bringing down at least the insured interest rates. And just overall 2024, if you're working and you're consistent at what you're doing, it's going to be a great year. But you got to work. Okay. No different than anybody else, anywhere else, anytime. You got to work. But be consistent at it. Be positive, because it will be a good year. And the other fact is there's lots of agents that some of them are deciding to sort of take a sabbatical for a little bit. I'm hearing throughout Ontario, lots of agents have decided maybe just to park their license for a little bit, but the good professionals like you're going to soar and you're going to be great. Okay. So today, the biggest factor is we're 30 days into TRESA. Okay. My goal today is to get it to the point that you feel comfortable. We'll take away any of the uncertainties on the main two things, dealing with buyers and dealing with sellers, because I want to get it to the point where you're comfortable with that. You can do what you need to be doing, which is basically helping people buy and sell real estate. Okay, I know there's lots of uncertainty, there's all kinds of different things going on out there about who do you have to work with, how do you have to work with them. I can tell you I spent, besides holiday time, I spent a lot of time in December being involved in lots of seminars, webinars, in communication with Ray Ferris, president of REA, in communication with Lou Randomsky, the REA's lawyer. And both of them were absolutely wonderful and really supportive of questions and talking about different scenarios and really made it simplified. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. Okay. So the biggest factor is we're going to look at first, we're going to look at dealing with buyers. Okay. Because there's questions that come up about, okay, you know, who can I show houses to? Who I can't show houses to? I want you to understand two scenarios, two basics that'll help you understand TRESA a little better. One is you as the representative, okay? You represent your client, okay? Now, depending on if your brokerage is doing a brokerage representation or if the brokerage is doing designated representation. And if you're not sure, just check with your own broker owners and see. But understand that you as the agent, when you're signing up a listing or you're signing up a buyer representation agreement, at least you're representing the client, okay? You're their representative. So you're the one that is going to discuss with them the RECO guide. You're going to go through the paperwork. You're going to give a service. You're going to give advice to them. You're going to give guidance to them. The brokerage still is going to provide service. Okay. So two things to look at is you as the representative, what your role is, and the brokerage role is they still have to provide service because the client is still a client of the brokerage. Okay, and that's going to, once we go through this, it's going to clarify it a bit better. Working with buyers, okay, understand that working with a buyer is the action of the possibility of a trade in real estate. And you have to remember the fact that anything to do with a trade in real estate is where TRESA comes in. Okay, buying, leasing, commercial leasing, anything with a trade in real estate, you have to follow the guidelines of TRESA. And the main new guideline of TRESA is the RECO mandatory guide. Okay, and the questions that have come up are, who do I have to give it to? When do I have to give it to them? Okay, so the scenario working with the buyer. Let's say you understand, okay, you can still advertise, you can still do your marketing, okay, that hasn't changed. So you're still doing your lead gen, you're still doing your flyers, you're still doing those things, door knocking, whatever it is you're doing, that hasn't changed, okay? It's when all of a sudden you have somebody that is looking at the possibility of a trade in real estate. So you have a buyer, you get a buyer that all of a sudden says, hey, I'm interested in looking at houses. You know, your first obligation then is to say, great, as of December 1st, mandatory now is the Real Estate Council of Ontario, and I highly recommend you use the term Real Estate Council of Ontario and not RECO, because if you're not in our industry, lots of people will not know what the acronym is. Right? So I highly recommend just using the term, hey, Real Estate Council of Ontario now has a mandatory consumer guide information that we have to provide to you, just so you can decide on a couple things about how you would like to, you know, the services that are available to you, if any, if you decide on doing real estate in Ontario. It's as simple as that. Okay. And so if you're working with a buyer, the easiest thing to do is simply say, hey, just before you want to look at houses, great. But let me just send this to you, because unless you've already received it, because you do want to find out if they're already received it, then obviously they've been in communication with a realtor. So you want to find out, like you would have before December 1st, are you working with a realtor? First, gotta be one of your first questions. If they are, then obviously you handle it the same way you did before. If they're signed up with somebody, you can't interfere with an existing agreement. Okay. But the guide is your first step. Okay, if you have an inquiry, just so that they understand that they have a choice. They can either be working with a realtor, not necessarily you. I highly recommend you say, hey, I got to send you something to say that, if you want to work with me or not. That's my recommendation. Listen to your own broker owners, because all the information guide is exactly that. It's an information guide. It gives them the information about, and you explain it to them, just like, here are the options of how you can do real estate in Ontario as of December 1st. So sending the guide to them would be your first step. And just so that they understand what their options are. Okay. The other issue would be then is the questions we're getting is, do I have to have a signed buyer representation agreement before I show a house? The actual answer is no. Okay. In the beginning, it was thought that you can't provide any type of guidance to any type of consumer until you had an agreement with them. Okay, that is not the case. I'm going to explain it to you. Now, the advice is absolutely, if you can get a buyer representation agreement signed just for that one particular house that you're going to show, or that series of homes that you're going to show, that would be very prudent and recommended. Okay, but you do not need to have one signed to show a consumer a property, your listing or otherwise. Okay, it is actually called implied representation. So here's a scenario on how you could do this, because I've had people ask me, I don't even know if I want to work with the people, and there are scenarios where agents were saying, well, I only, I want to meet with them, go out with them a couple times before we decide we're even going to work together. You can still do that. Okay. But it is highly recommended before you show any properties, just if you can get the buyer representation agreement signed, really recommend that, because at least for that one property or that series of homes you're showing on that showing period. But you do not need to do it. Here's what the scenario could be. You send them the RECO guide. Okay. You explain to them that that part is mandatory. On the last page, it's as simple as, if you notice the last page, it just says that you've acknowledged that you've received this and that I've explained it to you. And now that we've reviewed it, I just have to ask you a few questions. In the guide, it says you have two choices. You could either have the services of a realtor, or you can be a self-represented party. Are you interested in receiving services of a realtor? Give you guidance, give you opinion, help you with all the terms of an agreement, or are you more interested in doing it yourself, where you are self-represented, where a realtor cannot assist you in any way? I just need to ask you those two questions. Which one would you like? 99% of the time, they're going to say, I want the help of a realtor. Okay. Soon as they say, great, you want to help with a realtor? No problem. Then you know what? I can certainly help you with that. And that's good to know. What you have done is you've actually got verbal confirmation that they want to be represented, not by you, but by a realtor. Okay, that is implied representation. That now what the step would be, great, I'm just going to fire you off an email just to say we discussed the actual guide, and that you do want the assistance of a realtor, and you may say, it may not be me, but you want the assistance of a realtor. No problem. When did you want to go see that house? Because you've established giving them the guide, reviewing the contents of the guide, ask them about their intention, and that they want the assistance of a realtor, you now have created, okay, implied representation, and you've covered off your RECO. When you see them, you can get the last page of the guide signed by them, just acknowledging that you explained it to them, and you have fulfilled your TRESA requirements and can show them property. Okay? If you have questions on that, Michelle's going to watch the chat for any questions. But I wanted everybody to understand that, because there has been some not confusion, because when it first, when TRESA was first talked about, we couldn't show anybody anything. The idea was, unless you had them signed under an agreement. During that discussion that you have with that consumer, if they do say, no, I'm going to be representing myself, you cannot offer them any services and cannot show them any properties unless it's your own listing. Okay? Because under TRESA, it states that you as a realtor cannot provide services to somebody that has proclaimed to be a self-represented party. Okay, so there's two differences there. During your conversation, they absolutely confirm they want the assistance of a realtor. Okay, they understand the guide, and you can then proceed. If at any time they say during that conversation, no, I'm going to self-represent, you cannot offer them any services, which includes showing them listings that are not your property. Okay, I just want to make sure you get that clarification, because it's very strict in TRESA about realtors cannot offer any type of service to a self-represented party. The only way that you can show a self-represented party, okay, a listing, is if the listing is your listing, okay, under a designated representative, or if your brokerage is a brokerage representative, then you can show a company listing, because that's a service to your client, the seller. Okay. I personally, and again, meet with your own broker managers. I personally, though, would not be interested in doing anything with a self-represented party until you actually, under RECO, had the discussion with them. So the easiest way to do that, okay, great, you want to be a self-represented party, that's fine. We just need to meet in my office, because there's further documents, and I'll email them to you. As a self-represented party, I have to disclose to you things that need to be addressed. 99% of the time, there's no way a self-represented party is going to come in to see you at your office. Okay. And so that's the important part to understand. Okay. The difference between them giving you verbal confirmation that yes, they want the services of a realtor, and them declaring that yes, they're definitely going to be a self-represented party. Okay. Really did want to simplify the fact. Yeah, Michelle.
AJ, do you have a question?
Yeah, my question to Scott is, hello, Scott.
Yeah, hello, AJ.
Yeah, my question to Scott is, if you had an implied agreement, if a client or if a person agrees, and then after showing one property, then he decides a mind that he is planning to go with somebody else, or maybe he's one of his far distance cousin. So in that situation, how would we handle? Because we have already shown one house. He has acknowledged through email, and we have not taken any buyer rep agreement.
Right.
So how would we handle it?
Yep. without the buyer representation agreement, you as a realtor are entitled to nothing. Okay, so the reason, and that's why ideally, if you can get somebody to, and it's this hasn't changed, right? Prior to December 1st, if you didn't have a buyer representation agreement with them, you had no claim to any commissions or any services because you had no agreement with them. Okay, so no different now. So if you are and you want to be in a position that you have the opportunity of enforcing your relationship, then a buyer representation agreement, even for the one house that you're showing them, okay, for a
Right.
period of 24 hours, is
Mhm.
enforceable.
Got it.
Okay, but without
Okay.
any agreement, there's unfortunately nothing you can do in that situation. No different than prior to when agents were, sending their clients to the open houses, and then, you spend all your time at the open house talking to the people, and then find out, oh, by the way, I've got an agent myself who's going to bring the offer. Okay, no different. You didn't have any agreement. But the reason I wanted to give you that scenario about the implied representation is so that you understand that, yes, you can show property, okay, without having a buyer representation agreement signed. Okay,
Thank you.
Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So if a client or whatever, consumer has acknowledged reading this TRESA thing, I'm not even sure what it's called.
Yeah, just the guy.
I've not reviewed any of this stuff. So if someone's already done this in December and they call you and they want to see a house, and I have to say, well, before I can talk to you, I have to send you this. They say, well, I've already got one of those. I've already signed one. Like, as long as they've signed one, they can work with whoever they want, right? It's
Yeah,
not implied that it's with one realtor.
No, so let me give you the easiest example of that is prior to December 1st, you had to, at the first opportunity with any possible client, review with them their options of service in real estate. And most of the time we were using working with a realtor, right? Working with a realtor was a form that we would go through them. You could be a client, you could be a customer. There is possibility of multiple representation, but at the bottom, all you're doing is signing, acknowledging I reviewed the possibilities with you. It did not tie them to anybody. The RECO mandatory guide is exactly that same idea. Okay, that does not tie them to anybody. The actual last page is just an acknowledgement that they're acknowledging that you as the realtor did your job, giving them a copy of it and explained it to them. And so even if they've already done one with somebody else, you need to do one yourself, just as you would have had to do working with a realtor prior to December 1st.
So you do have to do it twice.
Yes, you need it for your file, because if RECO comes in to check and they're looking, they can pull files at any time, then you need to show that you explained it to them. And even though they say, well, I've already been explained to it, that's fine. That's for that other person's file. I need one for mine as well.
All right.
No different than working with a realtor.
Scott,
Yeah.
it's Stefan. If they already signed one with somebody else and they
Yeah.
tell you that, and they don't want to sign another one with you right now, but they continue to work with you and decide to put an offer, and at that point you will need to get that document signed again. Correct? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And understand a great question too, because the idea of all of TRESA is about a trade in real estate, right? It talks about the paperwork that we're talking about now is for a trade in real estate. So prior to doing any type of agreement, okay, for a trade in real estate, you need to have the buyer under a buyer representation agreement prior to the trade and real estate paperwork being done, So at the same time, if they refuse to sign it at the beginning, then just make a note, explain to them. And sometimes I would just follow that up, Stefan, with an email to them, just say, you know, just want to confirm I presented, we reviewed the RECO consumer guide, and that you're okay with the, you know, the understanding that I presented to you. They more likely will send you back an email and say, yeah, no problem, I got it, thanks for the explanation. Take that, put it in your file, okay? Prior to doing the offer, absolutely, they could sign that last page. And some brokerages are making the working with a realtor new form mandatory. My brokerage, as long as you've got the, that's Realty Executives Plus, by the way, as long as you have the RECO guide last page signed, then my brokerage, you do not need to have working with a realtor. However, I'm sharing best practices, okay? Best practices are, yes, do get them to sign working with a realtor, because under the new working with a realtor, there's an actual initial that they can place beside where it says they acknowledge that you reviewed the RECO guide with them and they explained it to them, and they initial that reinforces the fact that yes, you explained it to them. Okay, so in our company, it's not mandatory as long as you have the RECO guide, but as best practices, I highly recommend still using working with a realtor. Michelle, you had a question?
And when we're talking about the RECO guide, the question is, do we need to submit it with the offers to the office? This is a Realty Executives Plus agent.
No, you just need to submit the last acknowledged page with the signature. Kim, you got a question?
Yeah.
Just need to unmute yourself, Kim.
Yeah, actually, I think you might have touched on it. Because, you know, my understanding was that the guide, you are not responsible for getting a signature on the guide, you're responsible for sending the guide. And you get a receipt when you send the guide, so you can actually PDF that for your file if you need it. But that the working with a realtor is where you can get your signature if you were looking for more streamlined.
Yeah, depending on the the clarification is actually just sending the guide is not enough. Okay, so I know that when you go through RECO, you send the guide, it acknowledges that it was sent. Under TRESA, it actually stipulates that you have to not only send the guide, you have to explain it.
Oh yeah, no, that part was the give it, because you have to explain it in order to get the working with a realtor sign.
Okay, right.
Okay.
So if you're going to use working with the realtor, then you have them initial that saying that you explained it to them. Absolutely, that's fine. In other cases, as if you have, like with our group, as long as you have, you know, if you had the last page of that signed, I'm just saying, if you have the last page of the guide signed, you do not, in our case with Realty Executives Plus, as long as you have that part signed, then you do need to do working with a realtor as a mandatory document for us. But as your broker, I highly recommend you use it. I'm going to be using it, but it's not a mandatory for our file. In Kim's case, absolutely. If you explain it to them and you go through it with them and they sign working with the realtor, initial that you explained it to them, that covers all TRESA requirements. Thanks, Kim, for bringing that up.
There was one more question about the forms.
Yeah.
Is it the same form 810?
No, because Form 810 is not working with, oh yes, it is. It is. Yep. Sorry, I was just going something right. Form 81. Now, understand that there are two forms for working with a realtor. There is the one page where they squeeze a lot of information in, and then there's a 2-page. Both of them Okay, both of them have the explanation. But I can tell you as a senior person, looking at the new one page, it's really tight. Like there's a lot of information squeezed into one page. I personally, I'm going to use the 2-page just because it really makes it easy. Here's a paragraph, here's an initial spot, here's a paragraph. Either one, absolutely, and they are updated. Okay.
Hi, Scott.
Another
Dan.
question
Oh.
is,
Hang on one
as
second. Hang on one second. Dan was just going to ask a question.
Sorry, I was just wondering if you could touch base, what would be the best practices when conducting open houses with people streaming in and out?
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that when we do the seller section.
Okay,
That's
great.
okay.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Sorry, Michelle.
that's okay. As it is a legal document, I would think all pages should be initialed, not just the last page. I think
It's actually not a legal document. It's a mandatory guide. Okay, and how to explain that best is the last page is not a signature tying the consumer to anything. It's just an acknowledgement stating that you as the realtor fulfilled your obligation of giving them the document and reviewed it with them. So it's actually not a legal document. It's a guide where the legal part comes in. It's a more mandatory under our statute that we have to give it to them and explain it to them and get an acknowledgement somehow, somewhere, either on that form or working with a realtor, that they acknowledge receiving it and us explaining it to them. Okay. Now, basically, let's go through. Any other questions so far on dealing with the buyer up to this point? Because I'm going to go on to the buyer representation agreement. I'm going to help you on Schedule A because I've had all kinds of questions. Yeah, Anita? Oh.
Just a question, when we're on the RECO guideline to share it, when I'm doing it, I have done it previously, I've done it through Authentisign, and I've just put everybody's name that I'm showing the house to all in that one document. Is that good enough? And I email it to everybody. Is that good enough?
So are you saying you have multiple buyers, so as one client?
Yeah, I'm taking like mom, dad, and the daughter out.
Yep, that's fine.
They're all signing it.
Oh, they're all on, yeah.
Yeah, we're all gonna sign it, right? And
Why,
then,
they're all gonna sign the offer?
yeah, yeah, right?
Yeah, if they're involved in the trade and real estate, then the person involved in the trade and real estate is the one that should be acknowledging it.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, I've had
I
questions.
just shared it to this website. And it says Diane K received the RECO information guide.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, I've had questions on why do we have to do Schedule A of the buyer representation agreement? Okay, what you have to understand now is as of December 1st, the actual agreement that you're entering into is a service agreement. Okay, RECO now looks at you are a realtor providing service to a client. Without putting anything on Schedule A, you're actually in violation of RECO because you have not put anything to do with the type of service you're providing. Everything in pretty well in the buyer representation agreement talks about certain things, but the actual service you are providing, okay, needs to be given and acknowledged, or at least given and shown in what you're providing. And so we've had several questions on, what do I put there? What services? Well, actually, RECO gives us the answer. Okay. And so now understand, you do not have to put everything. You don't have to put everything you're going to do for them, but you have to at least show what services you're providing. And when I say RECO gives us the answer, I'm going to show you here, okay? Because let me share my screen with you. And I'm going to show you something. Let me know when you can see my screen. Michelle, can you guys see it?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So welcome to the new RECO website. And under RECO website, if you actually went to the main website, this is the first thing that pops up. Understanding RECO is now, really providing more stuff for the consumer, right? So it talks about the guide, it talks about everything here. If you go to buyers and sellers, this is the consumer side, okay? Things you need to know. And it says working with a real estate agent. Right here, okay? Services, this is basically, if you look at for a buyer, here's some examples of what you could put on that Schedule A to be compliant. As a buyer agent, they're going to assist you with getting pre-approvals for financing so you know how much you can afford. Make you aware of any tax exemptions you might be eligible for. Gather and share information about the neighborhoods and homes that meet your requirements and arrange to show you your homes you'd like to see. Inquiries about zoning, permitted use, advise you on the best approach in, competing offer situations. All of this as a buyer agent, you pretty well do. Guide you through paperwork and closing the transaction successfully. Provide referrals to other professionals you need. For example, home inspectors, lawyers, or contractors. There's the answer. This is on page 2 of the actual guide. It's as simple as that. Okay. So now, while we're on this page, here's exactly the same thing for Schedule A of a listing agreement. You don't have to put all of these services, but in all fairness, if you go through these, the consumer is seeing it in the guide, the consumer is seeing it in your Schedule A, RECO's already put it in front of them. You don't need to go more than this. Now, if there are some things in here that you're not going to be doing, for instance, maybe you're not going to do, videos and virtual tours, don't put it in. Okay. So simple. There's the answer. RECO gave it to us. It's in their guide. It's compliant with your TRESA requirements for showing and letting them know what services you as a representative, either buyer or seller, are providing them. So I wanted to share that with you because that is the simplest way of being compliant. Okay. Now, I have realtors that have said, hey, I'm going to load that whole thing up. I'm going to show everything, like my whole listing presentation, my whole buyer presentation. I'm going to be a Schedule A. Great. Good for you. But understand, you do not have to. And to be compliant, you do have to show services. So my suggestion is make it as simple as, here's what's in the RECO guide. Here's what's in Schedule A. You can provide way more than what you put down, okay? But if you put a service down, make sure you actually complete that service that you're putting. Okay? So I really want, hopefully that really gives you a little bit more relaxing on, okay, how do I fill out, what do I put on that schedule? Okay, so you can
One
just,
question.
yep.
Is there a special form number for Schedule A under the BRS, or is it just attached?
It's actually, there is a secondary, right under buyer representation agreement. The next form is actually buyer representation agreement Schedule A. Okay, I don't know the number off right away, but I am going to go and show it to you. Okay, now something else to think about is when you are representing a client and you want to negotiate in their best interest to try and help them, get the deal, okay? I always want to be able to, try and pull at the heartstrings of either if I'm representing the buyer, I want the other agent, I want the sellers to really feel like they know my people. Currently, though, under TRESA, you cannot provide any disclosure about motivation for either of your clients, okay? Unless it's in writing. If your client gives you permission to disclose their motivation for moving, buying, okay, you have the right to share that. And I, as a negotiator, I want to be able to go and say to, the selling agent and hopefully get in front of the sellers and go, hey, I really want to share with you the fact that, my buyers are a young family. Their kids are really looking to go to the specific school around in this neighborhood, and they're either transferred in or whatever it is. Unless you have that in writing, you can't share that. Okay. Now, prior to December 1st, we all did it, right? We all wanted to give the information and disclose this is the reason why. Here is my suggestion, and I know this falls under TRESA. If you want your buyers to give you permission to give their motivation on why they're moving, add it to Schedule A. Just put a clause in Schedule A. It says, I, such and such, whoever the names of the buyers are, hereby could give permission to our, representative to disclose the fact that we're moving into the neighborhood because of wanting to locate to the schools, or we're transferred into the city. If that's on Schedule A, you have the right to disclose that. Okay. Same thing. I'm going to get into the listing side, but the same thing goes with Schedule A on the listing side. How many times are you, asked about, okay, why are the people moving? Why are the people moving? Right? Well, on Schedule A of the listing agreement, ask if the sellers are going to give you permission to disclose why they're moving. They're downsizing, the house is too big, or they're retiring and moving to the East Coast. Put it on Schedule A. Just put a clause in that says, I, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, give permission to our representative to disclose the fact the reason we're moving is we're downsizing and moving to the East Coast. It's in Schedule A. They've signed it. They've given you written permission to disclose that. So you've got to think about negotiating the agreement. Sometimes people don't want to release why they're moving. But in all fairness, I've been able, when the buyers feel more comfortable about buying a certain property because, the people live there a long time, they really, the idea of knowing what those people are doing can actually help get a little more money. So just think about it that way. But as long as it's in writing, and as long as they've given you permission to disclose it, you can. Okay, so use Schedule A for that. Okay. Any further questions on working with a buyer right now before we jump over to the listing side?
So, so Scott, this is Gautam. So with buyer representation agreement, we should always have a Schedule A then, right? Definitely,
Correct.
that's what you're recommending.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you need to have somewhere where you're providing the client the services that you're giving.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it could be just as simple as, you're going to show you houses, and I'm going to prepare the offer, I'm going to present present for you.
Got it.
Okay. But again, looking at the ones that are in the RECO guide, why not?
Might not, to standardize,
Exactly. And I know there's some questions of multiple representation. I'm actually going to follow that up right after we do the listing side, if that's okay. Okay. So if everybody's okay with the brokerage side, biggest points is, sorry, with the buyer side, biggest points is, you know, what goes on Schedule A? How can you show properties without having a buyer representation agreement? That can still do that, okay? And what do you do with an SRP? Basically can't show it to them without all the proper stuff, okay? Sellers, again, with sellers, understand that the agreement, as long as if you're doing it with the designated representative, then you as the listing agent is the designated representative, okay? So when you're doing your listing agreement, same thing on Schedule A, put down the services you're providing. I highly recommend just using what's in the guide, okay? And then you've absolutely covered off that part. Couple of questions I get, and there always are, okay? But Scott, in our brokerage, you know, we advertise each other's listings. Can we still do that? We sit on other, you know, other agents' open houses. Can we still do that? The answer is yes. Okay. There was some on some gray area about saying, well, if you weren't one of the designated representatives, then you could not advertise the property. And there was questions, or you couldn't sit on the open house. Again, remember at the beginning where we talked about representation, and then we talked about services from the brokerage. Okay. With a designated representation, if that's who the listing agent is, as long as you do not disclose motivation, what the seller will take, any of the stuff that you as the designated representative are privy to, okay? As long as that is not disclosed, then anybody within your own brokerage can sit on the open house and can advertise it, because the information that you're marketing is general information that's usually on the MLS information data sheet. So you're talking about the neighborhoods, you're talking about the number of bedrooms, you're talking about, you know, anything to do with the basement's finished, you know, the roof's only 2 years old, he's got upgrades. All of that is just general information, okay? So you as a realtor, as long as you got permission from the listing agent, or depending how your brokerage does it, then you can advertise that property without being a designated rep, okay? So from that point of view, then you can still continue within your brokerage, within your same company, advertise other listings that are within the brokerage, okay? And you can sit on the open house. So when you're sitting on the open house, you have to be, if you're with the brokerage, it's a service the brokerage is providing to the client of the brokerage, okay? You can't be privy, as I say, to any of the confidential information that the designated representative has. So when somebody comes into the open house, you do not need to stand there at the door and say, before you come in, you got to read this. Okay, you do not need to do that. Have them handy though. Please have them available, because as long as someone's coming in, you're going to do exactly what you did before, right? They're coming into an open house. Great, come on in, welcome. You know, first of all, I always ask, at least this is me, can I ask you where, you know, how did you find out about this place? Were you just driving around? Did you see it on social media? And my next question is, are you working with a realtor? Yeah, I know, we're working with a realtor. Great, then, you know, let me walk you through and go from there. Doesn't matter if they say they're working with a realtor, they're not working with a realtor. Any of the information that you're giving them, okay, is about the property that you know, okay? There's nothing that you're giving them that is privy to the designated rep from the seller unless it's in writing. So on Schedule A, if the seller said, absolutely, you can tell anybody coming through, we're moving because we're relocated and we want to get the buyers motivated, at the open house, you can share that information. You have the right to share that information because the client allowed that information to be shared. Okay, if they haven't, and then you would not be privy to it because their designated rep can't share that information with you. But as far as seeing on an open house, absolutely, the people can come through. You can talk about the neighborhood, you can talk about the property. The second, though, that they start asking questions that would be they would rely on your knowledge, your experience, your guidance, you have to stop. And you have to say to them, unfortunately, okay, unfortunately, I just have to let you know as of December 1st, because of the Real Estate Council of Ontario, before we start getting into specifics about an individual consumer's situation, we have to review the guide with you. And because you have a choice of either being the option of being represented by a realtor or being self-represented. So before you divulge any of your private information, you have to understand that we really do need to give you the guide. And once you understand the guide, then your options, and you decide you want the assistance of a realtor, then absolutely I can help you. I just happen to have one here if you want to take 5 minutes just to read through it. Let me know if you want the assistance of a realtor. And if they say yes, then absolutely you can chat with them. If they turn around and at any time, even when they're coming in the door, if they use the words, no, I'm self-represented, you gotta just keep your mouth quiet. They ask you any questions. Unfortunately, you under RECO, under TRESA, cannot give any service whatsoever to a self-represented party. Dan, you had a question about open houses. Does that help? Maybe it's not there. Hopefully that will help him.
No, that was good. That was fine. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sarah, you got a question?
Hi, Scott. Yeah, I have a question regarding like a seller what are the limitation of the information that can be disclosed from the seller side? Like, do we have to explain them all the limitation that can be information that can be disclosed on behalf of the sellers? If we have to explain them everything, or do they have option to explain about the reason of the selling the property or other personal information?
If the seller decides they don't want you to share that information, whatever they're telling you with anybody, you cannot share it.
I see.
Okay. You cannot share it because the information they're providing you as their designated representative, and you cannot share that, at least in our brokerage, with anybody else in our brokerage or with anybody else, consumer or any other agent, without them giving you permission to do that.
I see.
Right? So majority of the time, it's the motivation factor is, why are we selling? And that question always comes up. Doesn't matter if, from the co-op agents, why are the people moving? Well, unless the sellers have given you permission to disclose that, you can't.
And the personal information can be disclosed to the only agent who is included in the designated option, like any other agent we can add on in the team, right?
The only people that information that either your buyer client or seller client shares with you can only be disclosed to the names in the designated representative, as long as that's what you're doing. Okay, if you're doing the designated representative, which our brokerage, Realty Executives Plus, is doing, then those are the only people that can have that information, unless you have written permission from the client to disclose it.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Lorena, you have a question?
Hi, Scott. I don't know if you touched base on this already or if you're not there yet, but how does this work when you're out and you're door knocking? Because you have to give information to the people that you're coming in contact with. So how do you handle that situation with the new TRESA guide rules?
Yeah. So door knocking does not right away involve a trade in real estate. You're marketing. Okay. Normally when you're door knocking, you're going around talking about, you may be sharing some information that is open to the public about, market stats in the neighborhood, things like that. Talking about that there's activity in the neighborhood, there are buyers that unless you have a buyer yourself, but you could certainly say, this area is really attractive to buyers. And are you at a point where you'd be looking at selling, or if not today, when? And that's just a conversation. That doesn't fall under TRESA because you haven't got involved in the trade in real estate yet. Where TRESA would come in is if they decide that they want to get an opinion of value from you, then the information that you would have to supply to them would be the TRESA, the RECO guide. Okay. There's nothing that, like, if you started a conversation where just general information about the neighborhoods and things like that, then it would be there's no guide that you need to hand to them. They ask you specifics about their property where they're going to rely on your knowledge and your expertise. My first thing would be, great, I can certainly, please understand that there are some options for you. When you're dealing with realtors in Ontario, there's a guide that we have. You can have one with you, absolutely. And again, same thing, if they want to read through it and they say to you, oh yeah, no, definitely, if we're doing it, we want the services of a realtor, you could have an open conversation with them because that's an implied representation, okay?
So to do things like setting them up in the system to get, let's say, listings that come up, we can just go ahead and do that without having any sort of contracts with them or having them sign the guide.
Well, you can have a general conversation about what's going on in the area. If you start supplying them with information that's specific that they're going to take as being your expertise, and you have to consider if they're going to rely on that before you enter in those conversations, you need to have the guide in their hands, and they need to understand what their rights are as a consumer. And personally, I wouldn't, when I was door knocking, I never gave any opinions of value or anything like that I always said, absolutely, if you want, I can take a quick walk through. When I finished my walkthrough, my conversation was, hey, thanks so much for having me through. I'm available. Would you be available tonight around 8 or tomorrow at 6? Be better for me to come back with a proper market evaluation to present to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Colleen, you have a question?
Yes, just going back to the open house.
Yeah.
Let's say you're the listing agent and the
Okay.
person coming through indicates that they're a self-represented individual.
Yeah.
And part of it is, how do you address it? Says, can you assist them to help your client sell their property? So how much can you assist in that situation? The person walking through is a self-represented.
You cannot give any guidance. You cannot give them any opinions. You cannot give them anything that they would rely on your knowledge, and that would be deemed a service. You can share with them the details that are on the MLS listing.
And that's it.
That's it, because that's public information.
Right.
Okay.
You said you could provide assistance to help your client sell their property.
Right.
So just wondering,
yeah,
how
so
much of that information.
So here's how that is. You're already providing assistance to your client, the seller, by allowing the self-represented person to come through. You're providing assistance to your client by giving them the details of the MLS listing. If the self-represented party turns around and starts asking things about conditions of the home, or what should you know, what kind of values are in the neighborhood, you got to stop. Sorry, you're self-represented. I cannot provide any services under the Real Estate Council of Ontario rules and regulations to a self-represented party.
Okay.
If you decide you don't want to be self-represented, then we could have a different conversation and be different paperwork that we'd have to go through.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Mark, another question?
Yeah, sorry to be a bother.
That's okay. That's why we're doing this, right? There's always these little questions, right? We got to get everybody comfortable enough so they can just go out and list and sell real estate.
Yeah, well, I'm still working with the realtor forms. I haven't started those yet, but maybe I will one day.
That's okay. Are you still using press card, third copy's yours, or are you using web forms now?
Oh yeah, I got a little printer in my car, and I print up the offers in front of the house like I used to back in the 80s. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I've already probably should probably have about $200,000 in fines already based on my business to this. But
okay, we're gonna get you through it.
Yeah, it's fine. So this Schedule A stuff with the buyer agency and listings.
Yeah.
You said you have to disclose or you have to put in what they want to disclose. It would be much easier, wouldn't it, to say, if my client says, I don't want you to tell them, about the water in the basement last year, but you can tell them everything else. Like, I don't want to get into a list.
Mark, if they tell you they had water in the basement last year.
Well, okay, I'm using that as a bad example. Let's say they just have, there's only one thing I don't want you to tell people, but you can tell them everything else as far as getting my house sold. I got to get this house sold. So, am I going to start listing all these details about what I can say? Or should I just say, you know what? This is the one thing they don't want me to say. And everything else is good to go.
Well, let me correct you on, if it's a latent defect and the seller has
Well,
do
yeah,
about
bad
it.
example. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to clarify for everybody.
Yeah.
As of December 1st, if you know of a latent defect and the seller says they've told you about it and they don't want it to disclose, you have to disclose it.
Oh no, yeah. I'm
So,
sorry.
but Mark, I guess the easiest thing would be to say, and when I talk about the disclosure on there, they don't have to list anything. I'm just saying that if there is something that you as the professional say to them that could help sell their house, hey, Mr. Seller, look, I know in negotiating that the buyers will feel more comfortable if they know, if I could share with them the reasons why you're moving, because they want to feel more, more comfortable with the sale, but I need you to tell me. But so absolutely, you could do that. If there's something that they turn around and say, no, I don't want them to know why I'm moving, then you say, fine, then there's nothing I'm going to disclose.
No, but if there's everything. So today I showed a place, it's not even listed.
Yeah.
So, the people, I guess I can't even tell you anything because I don't have a whatever, but let's just say they're make-believe people.
Yeah.
So, her husband's dying. She doesn't have any money. The mortgage rates are going up in March. She's not going to be able to afford the house. She needs it sold in 60 days or she's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So I would say to her, are you okay with me telling people your situation, or is there something that you don't want me to disclose? Because if she says, I just need this thing sold, and sure, people need to know that my husband's dying, or the rates or whatever. Like if she says to me, I guess what I'm saying is, if I ask it in a different way, is there anything you don't want me to disclose that wouldn't put, like a latent, like other than these other defects? can I just do it that way? Or do I need to say, yes, you can disclose motivation, you can disclose financials, you can disclose, like, I don't want to have to make a list because it just doesn't make sense to me to do that.
You need permission to, as their designated representative or as their representative, you need permission, written permission to disclose anything. That
Right.
would be.
So they can say anything then.
No. When I say anything, I mean, you have to list specifically what you have been given permission to disclose. So if
Wow.
she's saying, disclose my financial situation, disclose my family situation, absolutely you need to put that in there.
Okay, but that, yeah, I just see that being sort of unrealistic going through all that stuff.
But the majority of the time though, Mark, most people may not want anything disclosed. They're under TRESA, it just says if you are going to disclose anything, you need to have it in writing. And just saying, I'm going to disclose everything, but this is against TRESA because you're not listing the permission that you've been granted for specific items. Okay.
Hi, Scott. Yeah, so if there is anything, we can just give them SPI, like seller property information to get signed. So that can be resolved all the, issues to get the disclosure from the seller. In regards to this question, Mark asked about, disclosure of the leakage. So if we can get just the SPI signed from the client, that can be enough.
Absolutely. I'm going to answer that two ways. The SPIS is actually information that you're gathering. And there is actually a big form now that is in web forms that describes the use of the SPIS on how it can be used. So I personally wouldn't recommend using the SPIS because it's not giving you the actual permission to share the information. Okay. The SPIS ideally, and I'm gonna talk about a few forms later, but the SPIS is great for getting information gathering as the listing agent. But this is my personal opinion. I would never use the SPIS and attach it to the listing agreement. I would only use it for my own personal use, for my own knowledge, because there are cases where the SPIS has been used in court cases, and it's unfortunately put the sellers in a liable position. Okay, that's my opinion. I never used them, haven't used them. But in this particular case, for anything that you are going to disclose, it has to have the permission to disclose it. The SPIS, if I remember correctly, does not have anything in there that actually says that the seller gives you permission to share this information.
So the purpose I ask this question because there can be like confusion between a client and the agent, and then can be resolved by getting that document signed earlier. So then we have a proof that we have get the consent from the seller, and all the information regarding this property include in this form. So
sure. No, and if you're going to use it for that personal use, absolutely, that can help. But that doesn't give permission. That doesn't give permission to disclose that to any other party. Okay, that's the difference.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Still on the listing side, Nancy? Question?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you and I had a recent conversation about a death in the house. And I was always under the understanding, going through my real estate career, that if you knew something about a death in the house, you had to disclose it. But as far as doing a Schedule A on a listing agreement, if you are aware that somebody died in the house, where do we go from there? If the seller says, no, don't tell anybody, and they find out after, which did happen to me, how do you recommend handling that type of situation?
Okay, so now you're talking about as a listing agent, a possible stigma.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Couple things with stigmas. A death in the house does not have to be disclosed. Okay. If there is a death in the house and you are aware of it, and somebody actually asks you a question about it, did a death actually happen in the house? You have to answer truthfully. The answer would be yes. If you are the listing agent and in the agreement of purchase and sale, there is that clause that says, you know, the seller represents that there's been no floods, no deaths, no criminal activity. You have to answer truthfully and say, yes, there was a death in the house. This was the occurrence. You do not need to mandatory disclose that. Okay.
Okay.
So that is, but if you do get the question or if it's in the agreement, you have to.
Okay. I mean, and my other concern, we were talking about open houses earlier, and my other concern is that I feel like it's going to be a very difficult conversation with people when you say, I'm sorry, I can't discuss this with you until you sign this paper. I feel like people are going to bolt, because I know if somebody puts a paper in front of me and says, sign this.
Okay, hold on. Wait a sec. I didn't say they had to sign anything. It's if they come in and if you explain to the, if they're, you can give general information about the property.
Mm-hmm.
If the minute they start telling you about themselves and their situation, you have to make sure that they understand their options as a consumer. And that's where the guide, that's where you have to stop, because now you're crossing over a line where you're now getting personal information, motivation information from a consumer without them having the guide information first.
Okay, fair.
Okay. And understand signing the guide, and that's where you really have to read that last page. It doesn't say anything about them. All it says is they've acknowledged that you explained it to them and gave it to them.
Okay, fair.
Doesn't commit them to anything. Okay. But after if they did, and they're sitting in the open house and they do read through it and they go, oh yeah, I'm all comfortable. I do want the services of a realtor, because you know, they're not, that doesn't tie them to you in any way. It just says, yeah, we'd like the services of a realtor. Then you could have an open discussion with them and just acknowledge these people came through the open house. I reviewed the guide with them. They understood. They absolutely verbally said they want the services of a realtor. Make a note of it, put it in your file. That's implied representation. If they say, no, I don't want the services of a realtor, I'm going to self-represent, you got to stop right there and say, please do not tell me anything, because I represent my client. And if you are a self-represented person, there's 2 other forms under RECO that you have to do with them before you can do anything with them. Okay?
Scott?
Yeah.
If they say, yes, I want to work with a realtor, but I don't want to look at the guy right now and I'm not going to sign anything, what do you do?
As long as you've explained it to them, and if they don't want to sign it, that's fine. But if you explain it to them and they're going to work with a realtor, you've covered off the fact, because it just have it with you, just explain to them, here are the options, right? Here are the options. You can be services of a realtor, you could be self-represented. If you find when you're working with a realtor, here's the advantages of working with a realtor. And at the end of it, you say, would you like to get services of a realtor in this process? And it doesn't have to be me. It could be anybody that's licensed in Ontario. Would you like services of a realtor? And they go, yeah, no, that's the avenue we're going to go. Make a note of it. Just say, great, no problem. Then I can continue on the conversation with them.
So it's pretty much business as usual. Just need to ask them, do you want to work with a realtor or not?
Except you have to explain the guide.
But if they don't want you to explain it at that point because they don't have the time or you did what you had to do.
It
Basically.
takes, if you do it right, it takes 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know that, but like sometime when I do, and somebody said, "Do you want to look at this?" I would explain to you. It'll take 2 seconds. I don't have time.
Okay,
So-
well, then, yeah, and Stefan, that's perfect. As long as when you're showing them through the open house, you're only talking about the public information about the neighborhood and all that stuff. If the consumer gets in and if they're all of a sudden the consumer starts saying to you, hey, look, we've got 45,000 down, our income is this, we're transferred in, you got to, as a realtor, say, please understand, I really don't need you to share that with me, because under the Real Estate Council of Ontario, you know what, before we get into those kinds of discussions and details, we do need to go and be explained about what your options are when you're working with a realtor.
Good.
That's the difference.
Good, easy enough.
Yep, but you can absolutely show them around, talk about the property. Okay.
Good, thank you.
Okay. And they may not give you their name. Hopefully you got them to sign in, as you should at every open house. Try and get the consumers to sign in. Then you can basically just say, just for my records, can I ask your first name, just so I know that I can mark this down, you came through, and that was it. But as soon as a consumer starts talking and about their personal information, you need to really say to them, just hang on a second. Before we get into that, I just need to share with you, when you're working with a realtor, or your option of being self-represented.
Scott, that is a nice, in theory, that works. When I'm dealing with a 92-year-old who looks at me and says, I don't want to sign any papers, it's not going to happen until she's ready to sign the listing, and that might not take, or that might not be that day. But I still need to provide her the information.
Yeah, so you can make a note. All you got to do is make a note that you went and saw this person at this particular time at this address. Here was the person. I gave them the guide, explained it to them. We're not interested in signing. On that back page, that's all you got to do. Put all that information, put it in the file. Okay, no different than originally when working with a realtor came out. I'm sure all of us had people go, I'm not signing anything. No, you're not signing anything. All you're doing is acknowledging, right? When working with a realtor first came out, people weren't signing anything. All of a sudden, all I'm doing, just acknowledging that. Now, how easy is it to get working with a realtor acknowledged? Way easier, right? So the guide, this is new. It's way thicker, so it looks way more important. So if they're not going to sign, just do exactly what you did before when they wouldn't sign working with a realtor. I presented it, I explained it on this day, stick it in the file. And in your particular case, Tina, when they go to get the listing agreement signed, either get them to sign the 1 page of the guide, or working with a realtor initial where they acknowledge that you explained it to them. Stick it in the file.
So I don't need to get this booklet signed, but I can do Form 811, which is the 2-page.
Yep.
Working with a realtor.
Yep.
Okay.
As
All right.
long as-
Super.
Yeah, as long as it's done prior to paperwork being signed for the action of a trade in real estate.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
The guide has to be given before you start having any personal discussions about personal motivation or providing services to somebody, because they need to know what their options are. No different than what working with a realtor was meant to be. Okay.
Julia, do you have a question?
You have a question? Michelle?
Yes, I do.
Yep.
So I guess we're assuming that if somebody is interviewing a bunch of agents for a listing, that those potential sellers will sign one of these or be explained by each person presenting. like, 3 people often interview. So is this an asset to us by starting with that and explaining that every agent that you're going to see, that you're interviewing, should go through this with you, and that you should acknowledge that you understand the guide?
Yes,
Yes.
because working with a realtor is exactly the same thing. Didn't matter if the potential listing person or people were interviewing 10 people before you discussed anything with them about real estate. Working with the realtor should have been the first document you presented to them and had it acknowledged. Okay. So no, it would be no different. Even if they've already done it with somebody else, then you say, great, no problem. Let me just take 5 minutes, because under my license, I have to make sure I've done it my way and explained it to you my way. And just go through it, take a few minutes, go through it with them, ask them to acknowledge the back page. If they don't want to acknowledge it, make a note, you presented it. And then when you follow up, ideally put it into your email. Hey, just want to confirm, if you don't mind, that I did go through the RECO guide with you and explained it to you. Just respond back, yes, you did. And just stick that email in your file. You are RECO compliant. Okay.
I have a couple questions in the chat here.
Yeah.
Going back to disclosures in Schedule A, the question is, where do we document disclosures? Should these be a part of Schedule A for a listing agreement?
I would put it, I would just put a clause into what they're disclosing.
Okay.
Okay, because it's part of the actual agreement, and as long as you have the words that says, I, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, give permission for our representative to disclose the following, whatever it is.
Okay. And the other question is, because this RECO guide comes into play when you're talking about, more services provided, like when people start talking about finances and all that.
Yeah.
How is this, the mandatory guide, going to affect things like casual conversation around fire pits with family and friends when they start asking questions and presenting ideas?
Doesn't affect it at all. You don't need the guide to talk about what's going on in the marketplace. You don't need the guide to sort of, they're going, hey, like what's happening in, sitting around the fire. Hey, what's going on in this lake? What kind of prices are going on? You can tell them, because that's all public information. It's readily available. They could Google that right now and get the answers. But if they start talking about, well, here's our situation, then you basically, hey, before we get into personal stuff, first of all, it shouldn't be around the campfire with everybody else. But then you would have to set a proper appointment up, give the guide, send the guide to them, explain it to them, and move on from there. But general information, scenario, what's going on in the neighborhood, all that kind of stuff is just information. It's when you start talking about a trade in real estate is when the guide really becomes important. And it's because of that personal motivation factor that they're going to share with you. Okay. Let me just cover off a couple things that you're a listing agent. Okay. You're listing a property. One of the issues is that, and I know that there's going to be some updates to the forms. When I was communicating with the lawyer and the president of REA, there's going to be some updates to some of the forms, even after this 1 month of being in use. I highly recommend that if you're the listing agent, under realtor remarks, put in what you are, in the sense of, listing agent is a designated representative, or listing brokerage is a broker representative, because that way then the buyer agent can actually fill in the confirmation of cooperation properly. Okay. If you are a buyer agent and you are submitting an offer and it's not on there, you need to reach out to the listing agent and find out what their representation is. Is it designated representation, Or is it brokerage representation? Because there's two different ways of filling in the confirmation of cooperation, depending on what their status is. So I highly recommend, if you're a listing agent, just stick it in broker remarks so the buyer brokers know, oh, perfect, okay. It says right here, they're a designated representative. I can fill in the confirmation cooperation. Okay. Couple things also, had questions on if you're a listing agent and, or, you know, or you're on the open house and consumers come through, can you follow up with them? The answer is yes, unless they are a self-represented party, then you could follow up with them. But the only thing you can say to them is, are you still a self-represented party? And if they say yes, you can't give them any information. But you can, as the listing agent or the brokerage of the listing, can follow up with consumers because it's a service to your client. Okay, there were some questions on, can I, as a listing agent, follow up on, inquiries or showings or open house? The answer is yes, because it's a service to the client of the brokerage. Okay. Let me just check on a few things here. Now, I'm going to get in, just before we get into multiple representation, one of the things you have to understand is you have a service agreement, okay? Either working with the buyer or working with the seller. If you know you're going to be going away and you're a designated representative, if you know you're going to be away or you're going to be in a position that you cannot provide those services, you need to add somebody else who could be that designated representative. Okay? Because if you are the only person that's providing the services and you can no longer provide those services, there's actually a possibility that the person can cancel the agreement because you are now in a position where you're not providing the services. Okay, so for instance, I know I'm going to be away for a week in January, and now I'm going to have access to internet. I'm going to be able to, do my services. But if you're in a position where you're not going to be able to, then make sure that the best time to do it is when you're actually doing the agreement, either buyer or seller agreement. Make sure that you also put in an alternate designated representative who's going to be around to provide the services that you're providing. Okay. Okay. Just going to make sure I've covered off everything so far. Okay. Question comes up on multiple representation. And when does that actually happen? Okay. If you are a designated representative, the only time multiple representation. Hang on, there's a question. Scott, during confirmation cooperation, you got cut off at my end about ask. Okay. I'll get to it. With multiple representation, okay. If you are a designated representative, so you're the listing designated representative, the only time there will be multiple representation if you are also going to be representing the buyer. If anybody else in your company, in the brokerage, represents the buyer and they're a designated representative of the buyer, there is no multiple representation. Okay? You can still do multiple representation. It has not been canceled or anything like that. But understanding if you are going to be doing multiple representation, there's additional forms now that you have to complete. And you can't just use confirmation of cooperation to say there's multiple representation. There's other forms, I think they're 325, 326 talks about multiple representation, okay? If you are part of the same team, then what you have to understand, that if you're part of the same team, and this is where teams have to be careful, if you're taking a listing as a team, only the team members that are on the listing as a designated representative are the ones that are entitled to the information, motivation of the seller. You cannot share that with other team members, only the ones that are on designated representation. Okay? If there are other members on the team that are not listed as designated representation, and as long as the information about motivation, what the sellers will take, has not been shared with the other team members, then the other team members can be designated representatives for the buyers, and it would not be multiple representation. Okay? Teams can get a little more complicated, so if you are on a team, you just have to really be careful on, especially more so with the listing side, obviously, is that if you are a team member, then who is the designated representative for the listing? They're the ones that are privy to the information. That information cannot be shared unless in writing and direction from the seller with anybody else, including other team members. Okay? Does that answer, Anita, your question? Okay. Okay. Let me just go through. There was, I think somebody mentioned I got cut off a little bit on confirmation of cooperation representation. Michelle, is there a specific question in the chat with that at all, by chance?
That I don't see. I do see a question that says, if I were unavailable for whatever reason, can my designated rep be from a different company?
No. And there was also, I saw something there about, can I, as a person that wants to sit on an open house of another brokerage against the rules and regulations of RECO. The only way you can sit on another company's open house is if it is a co-listed listing. And as part of the co-listing agreement, it says the duties of what each brokerage can do, and it would have to specify advertising, open houses, marketing. Then you could sit on the open house, but it is actually against the rules and regulations of RECO for a person that is not a member of the listing brokerage to sit on the open house. And there have been cases in RECO where people got fined for doing it. Just to let you know. And that was even prior to December 1st and TRESA. Okay. Now, any other questions so far? Because there's one more. Oh, I see. Okay, I see what you mean. Okay, thanks, Matthew. Yes, so if the event that you are a buyer rep and you're working on doing the confirmation and cooperation, okay, and they have not in anywhere in the listing, and this is going to be one of the new changes, and some of the forms will have this updated. There's actually going to be a box under brokerage where it's going to say if you are a brokerage representative or you're a designated representative. So it'll be right on the listing forms, but it's not there yet. So if it's not there, it's your duty to, as the buyer or broker, to contact the listing agent and ask them, are they a buyer a brokerage representative, or are they designated representative? Because that has to get filled in on the confirmation of cooperation, which has to be completed before your buyer sign. And that's straight from RECO's lawyer, straight from OREA's lawyer. Okay. his quick answer was, if you don't have it, ask. It's got to be there. Do not send it blank. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, Matthew. Sorry, you got a question before I'm going to go on to one more best practices. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but I thought it was pretty important to go through these things so you can do the best job for your clients and feel confident. Sarah, one more, you have another question?
Yes, Scott. I have a question about confirmation of cooperation. What are the major differences in a brokerage representation and designated representation in regards to the commission or any other details we have to understand once we are just representing the buyer and working with the confirmation of cooperation?
Yeah. So under the confirmation and cooperation, there are now different under the listing brokerage. So if the listing brokerage is a if the listing brokerage is operating as a brokerage representative, okay, it's just the way it was. It's just they're multiple representation, and basically looking at it would be 1B if that is the way your brokerage works. Okay. The only time it would be where you are a listing agent, and if you're the buyer broker representing the client on your own listing and it's a designated, then you have to look at 1D on the form where it talks about multiple representation and designated representation. Okay, so those are the added ones. If you are doing multiple representation, understand that if under designated representative, it's only if you are the listing agent and you have the buyer under contract. Okay. Any other time, if you are a co-op brokerage and you're not in the same company, it's just as it was. They're the listing brokerage, you're the cooperating brokerage. Okay. So the only time multiple representation will come about, at least, Sarah, with our company, with Realty Executives Plus, is in the event that you have the listing and you have a buyer under contract that is submitting an offer on that listing, then that would be multiple designated representation. So if you get to that scenario by yourself with that, you may want to reach out to me or one of the managers and we can help you through it. But that's the only time that you would have to be concerned about how to fill in that confirmation. And then there are other forms that you have to do. I think it's 325, 326.
Thank you, Scott. I can come in the office, I think.
Yeah, that's okay. You get to that situation. And that's why I, as the broker of record for Realty Executives Plus, elected to make our brokerage be a designated representative because it eliminates 99% of multiple representation that we had issues with or the industry had issues with before. Okay.
As we're on the topic of multiple representation, I know we've gone quite over time, but there was a question just to see if we could pull up the form 326 and explain which box we check under different situations.
Okay. Let me just see if I can do that. And bear with me, let me share my screen. For multiple representation, seller consent or buyer consent, which one are we?
The question was for buyer consent, 326.
Okay. Multiple representation, buyer acknowledgement, yeah. So what the question basically would be Okay, understanding that if you are a brokerage that operates under brokerage representation, it is the same as it was prior to December 1st. Okay, so if I have a listing and I'm in the same brokerage and Sam got a buyer and we were broker representation, then it would just be this one right here, number 1, as it always has been. Okay. If though I am a designated, so I'm the listing agent and I'm a designated listing agent, and I am also got the client, okay, then it would be this one here where it says multiple representation and designated representation. And this is where it can get confusing, but this particular one where it says multiple representation and designated representation and brokerage representation, this is really rare. And the reason I say it's really rare is there are some brokerages that have not declared what they're going to be, and under RECO, you do not have to. So for instance, if there was a brokerage that had a listing that did not have a designated representative, and yet somebody in that same company had a buyer representation agreement that stated there was a designated representative, within that brokerage, they have both these scenarios. So they would have to initial this. Okay. Under our brokerage, Realty Executives Plus, this will not happen. Under our brokerage, designated or any brokerage out there, if you are a designated representation brokerage, then the only way this one would be happening is if you as the listing agent had your own buyer under a buyer contract. Okay. This top one is only if you are a brokerage representation company. Where it says limited services, okay, this actually falls in where, for instance, there's a limited service that you're providing, and that limited service could be the buyer comes in and all I'm doing is preparing the offer. It's a limited service. This is really, really rare. Okay, if you ever get in that situation, reach out to me. I can explain it further. But this area here is where some of this is going to be altered a little bit when I was communicating with the OREA lawyer, because this is some of the confusion. But hopefully I've explained it to you enough that if it's a brokerage representative, multiple representation, which means everybody in that brokerage, you've got an offer on your own company listing, it's this one. Your designated representation, it's only when you are the listing agent and buyer representation, it's this one. Okay.
So anyone asking from Plus should only be concerned with the third one.
If they have an offer on their own and they have yes, if it's for Plus, then if you have the listing, you're the designated representative of the listing, and you have a buyer under contract and you're the designated representative, it's this one here. Okay.
And then there's a separate one for the seller, correct?
Correct. Separate one for the seller. Exactly the same information, except it just says for seller. Just different heading. Same choices. Okay.
Okay.
I do want to show you some things that best practices. I'm going to say probably another 5 minutes so I can take your time. It's interesting because under TRESA with service agreements and trying to make sure that you are providing service and that you cover yourself for saying, I asked these questions, I went through it. These forms are in here and they've actually been here for a little bit, but I don't see many people using them as best practices though. I want to reference you to all the way down to the 800s, and they're actually checklists that you can use. And I found these, going through them, very valuable, because you can actually helps you in a listing presentation. If you look at these basically it's form 820, form 821 for a condominium, form 823 for a checklist, and I'll go through them. But to me, this works great. And I know we talked about a little bit of the, the seller property information statement, except this one here is for residential information checklist. You could go through this with the seller and basically, great questions, how long have they occupied it? Is there anybody else that's part owner, condominium or freehold? And it goes all the way through some great questions. Are there any right-of-ways? Do you have a survey? Any disputes about boundaries? Like maybe there's a neighbor who's already, anything with zoning that they may be aware of. And this document is great to go through as a listing agent. And it's got some wonderful questions and great ways of covering yourself to show that you went through and had good information, and just put this in your file. Great topics for covering during a listing, right? Like right down to everything about the fireplace. Is there any problems with the heating system? Are you aware of any moisture or water problems? Are you aware of any roof leakage? Some great ways of going through this. And at the end of it, it doesn't have a spot for the consumer to sign. I'd get them to sign. Just say, just acknowledge this, perfect. I'm just going to put it in my file. Because if ever an issue came up, buyers moved in, all of a sudden there was something going on, and the seller says, oh, I told them about that. Actually, let me pull out my checklist. We went through that question and you said no. So I really thought this was a good form. And again, so if you look at 820, 821, in addition to this is for the condominiums. There's another checklist, just in the low 800s there, about rental items, what's under lease, 823. So as best practices, if you have not used these before, have a good look at them, okay? Because I think you'll find them as being really good and informative forms that really give you good questions to ask, especially when you're doing a listing. Okay, Colleen, another question?
Yeah, what would be a good point to fill this form out when you're doing the listing? Is it before you fill out the data form, or is it at the end? Do you have any suggestions?
I would do this when you're actually doing the information about the property before you put it on because a lot of these good questions, like there's questions in here about, are any of the items rental units, rental items? So I would do this form as part of the, as part of and before you actually do the complete data form itself.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Before I leave this screen of the web forms, is there another form that anybody's asking me to bring up?
There's just a question on if you were going to touch on exclusive listings at all.
Oh, that's an easy one. Let me get out of this. Okay. Everybody here is a member of a real estate board. Y'all got bombarded yesterday with the new CREA policy. That policy was agreed to almost a year ago and was set and discussed, and it talks about exclusive listings as of yesterday. You as a member of the Canadian Real Estate Association, and if you are a member of a real estate board, you are automatically a member of CREA. If you are in any way going to take a listing that is an exclusive listing and you are going to market it, and they're very specific on what marketing means. if you share it in any platforms, you put a sign up, you do anything that is a promotion in any way, within 3 days of you doing that, the listing must go on MLS. If you do have an exclusive listing, now, clarify that, it's not for all properties. If you have commercial, if you have a pre-construction, there are some things that are covered or not covered, then just read into the policy. But this whole thing came about because when people were putting up exclusive listings and going to have coming soon to MLS, and it was coming soon for 2 months, and there was a sign on and they were promoting it and people were trying to find it and realtors were trying to get information on it. CREA came out with a policy and said, if you're a member of the Canadian Real Estate Association, and then if you are going to do that, you have to, if you are going to market your listing in any way, then you have 3 days. After the 3rd day, it must be put on MLS.
So Scott, so in the past, when we put the sign up and on the sign, we said exclusive, what you saying is not acceptable anymore?
It's acceptable for 3 days.
Yeah, beyond 3 days.
Yep.
So even if you put on that sign exclusive.
Yep, you have 3 days to put it on MLS. Okay.
If there's no more questions about the exclusive one, there's another hot topic. The insurance coverage, any information you can give on that, as it is effective as of January?
Yeah, your best, if you have any questions on that, just go to the OREA website and just go underneath whatever guidance they're giving you. Okay. So if you are going to be back to this policy, the CREA policy, if you are going to do, you can still do an exclusive listing and do reference, like we're talking about more your typical residential property, because there are some exclusions in there, as I say, pre-construction, commercial leases, certain things like that. Just read through, and if you're a member of, you are a member, so just go through your emails, because I think I got about 8 of them yesterday, all from all the boards, just talking about, here's this reminder of this new policy. It just basically says if you can still do an exclusive listing, you just can't market it in any way beyond the 3 days. Okay, so if you have somebody that says, look, I just want you to, work on this listing, you can say, great, but beyond 3 days, I can't market it in any way. I can certainly do one-on-one conversations. I could reach out to individual realtors and say, hey, in case you've got anybody, I got a 3-bedroom bungalow that's exclusive, but you can't market it in any other way except one-on-one to other realtors. Okay, so you can still do coming soon, but beyond 3 days, it's got to go on MLS, or you cancel that exclusive, or don't need to cancel the exclusive, just stop doing all the marketing. Okay, Colleen, you got another question?
Yeah, I have another question.
Sure. Okay.
I had packages in the past for buyers, submit an offer listing package. All the forms were in it. The new forms are changed a bit. To change those packages, are they going to those packages? You know where I could find those? Or are they going to be updated with the new forms, or?
The new forms are available, but depending on where you got the packages from, you just have to check with the provider.
They were in the web form. They were on the web, and I just created a package. Or it was there, I think, from Realty Executive, I believe. Maybe it might have been from our office, but I just sort of took those, and the forms in those packages would be the old forms. I'm assuming they wouldn't be updated.
Well, do check your, if you had, I guess, kits in web forms, or if you already had pre-done kits.
Yeah.
Just go in and make sure. They said that they would be updating those forms, or you may have to refresh them.
Yeah.
And so that is something that you just have to check and make sure you're using the most updated forms.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in my discussion with OREA lawyer, Lou, he is the one that actually does the forms explained. You know, the documents that have the red line showing all the forms have red lines.
Yeah.
He is actually working on those. They are going to be redoing those.
Yeah.
They're not quite ready yet, but they will be coming out. He was just waiting because there are some edits that are coming out, and then he'll be working on those forms explained.
Okay, just wondering if my packages will be automatically updated with the new forms, or do I need to go somewhere and update them, change the form?
I actually don't know. I may just want to maybe put a question out to web forms directly or the board, depending on who your actual provider is of those kits.
Yeah, okay.
Unless somebody here already knows the answer. If somebody does, just put it in the chat, let us know. I don't know the answer if kits will automatically be updated or not.
Thanks.
Okay. I know we covered off a lot. Again, my goal in the beginning was hopefully to get you to a point where you were more comfortable with the process of being able to help, go out and just do what you do best, help people buy and sell, list properties. And the scary part of the forms and how to use them and what you could do. Hopefully I've alleviated some of that. And so you can go out and do the jobs that you guys are best at. Always here to answer questions. As long as there's nothing else that anybody has, I really appreciate the time. It's almost been 2 hours. I know that's a long time, but hopefully we've covered off some stuff. I'm always here, as I say, reach out to me if you have any individual questions, any individual situations. You can reach out to the broker owners, companies you're affiliated with, and we'll do more of this as, there's always going to be updates and things like that coming out. And, anytime we can share situations, it benefits everybody. So I appreciate everybody's time. And if there's, again, anything else that we can help from this side, let us know. And I wish all you guys a fabulous 2024. It's there for the taking. Just got to go do it.
Thanks for your time, Scott.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Yes, Scott, thank you.
Thank you.